Was she being taken to a home or to her grave? That question echoed in her mind as the rope cut into her wrists and the trapper dragged her through the freezing mountain forest. Snow covered the ground like a white shroud, and the wind felt like sharp claws tearing at her thin shawl. She had been sold by her own father for a handful of silver and to erase a gambling debt. Her father had traded his only daughter to a man who smelled of old whiskey, rotten teeth, and cruelty. Now that man was selling her again. The trees stood tall and silent around them, like cold judges watching her fate. Her legs felt heavy, her heart empty, and every step she took felt like walking toward the end of her life. "Almost there," the trapper grunted. His voice sounded rusty, like a broken gate. He pointed toward a small trail of smoke rising in the dark evening sky. "He'll take you. Settle my account." Fear crawled up her spine. She knew who lived there. Everyone in the settlement spoke of him in low whispers, as if scared he might hear them even from miles away. They called him a ghost of the mountains. Some said he lived with wolves. Others said he was half-beast himself, a man who once lived among people until something terrible drove him away. They said he had a heart as cold as the mountain stone. The cabin stood against the hill like it had grown out of the frozen ground. Thick logs formed its walls, and it looked more like a fortress than a home. A pair of glowing yellow eyes watched from the shadows of the porch. A wolf, large and silent, its fur gray like ash. It didn't growl or move. It only watched. The trapper shoved her forward, and she fell to her knees in the snow. He banged his fist on the door. The sound was dull, swallowed by the cold air. The door opened. A huge man filled the doorway. He was tall, broad and strong, like a mountain. His beard was long and wild, mixed with gray. His hair fell around his shoulders, but it was his eyes that struck her. They were the color of a frozen lake, blue and cold, yet holding a deep sadness that felt older than time. The kind of sadness that lives in someone who has lost more than a person should bear. The trapper cleared his throat, suddenly less confident. "I've come to settle my debt. Furs were thin this season, but she's worth more than the pelts I owe you. Strong back. She won't give you trouble." The mountain man looked at her. His eyes slowly took in the rope burns on her wrists, the bruises on her face, the shaking in her shoulders. He didn't see a strong back or a tool to use. He saw pain. He saw fear. He saw a girl who had been treated like an object, not a human. He gave one slow nod. The trapper didn't wait. He hurried away back into the trees, leaving her kneeling in the snow in front of the silent giant. For a long moment, the mountain man didn't move. Snow swirled around them. She held her breath, expecting a hand to pull her inside roughly or strike her across the face. Instead, he stepped forward and knelt in front of her. Her heart pounded. From his belt, he took out a sharp knife. She squeezed her eyes shut, certain this was the end. A soft sound followed. The rope loosened and fell. He had cut her free. He stood, pulled the door wider, and leaned his head slightly to the side, showing her to enter. A command, or an offer, she didn't know. Her cold hands trembled as she stood and walked inside. The cabin was small but warm. A fire burned in a stone hearth. There was a rough wooden table, one stool, and a bed made of furs in the corner. The air smelled of pine, wood smoke, and the wild scent of wolves that had lingered here for years. It felt like a place untouched by the world. He entered behind her and closed the door. The silence was heavy, almost too thick to breathe in. Without a word, he went to the fire, filled a bowl with hot stew, and placed it on the table. He pushed the stool toward her. He did not look at her or speak. She sat and ate. Hunger took over quickly. The stew warmed her from the inside, reminding her she was still alive. Days began to pass in a quiet routine. He woke early, left to check traps and hunt, and returned with wood or animals. He didn't speak. He didn't demand anything from her. He shared his home, his fire, his food. The wolves followed him like family, walking at his side without fear. She stayed mostly indoors. She mended her dress. She cleaned the cabin. She watched him. Slowly, she learned his silence was not cruel. It was the silence of someone who had been hurt so deeply that speaking felt dangerous. He carried sorrow the way mountains carry snow. Heavy, quiet, and unending. One night, the fire burned low and the cold settled in her bones. She shivered hard. He stood, walked to her, and placed a heavy wolf fur pelt around her shoulders. It still held his warmth. For the first time in years, someone cared if she was cold. She looked up. His face was in the shadows, eyes glinting in the dim firelight. "You were cold," he said. His voice sounded like it hadn't been used in years, rough, deep, and quiet. It was not a question. It was a simple truth, a kindness. The words touched a part of her heart she thought had died. She watched him return to his bed across the room, but something had changed. A tiny spark of warmth now lived between them. Something fragile but alive. They were two broken souls, trapped in the same winter. Unknowingly, they had already taken the first step toward healing. The mountain man's silence began to change without either of them noticing. It was no longer a wall keeping her out. It became a quiet space they both lived in, a space where small things began to matter. She started to hum while she swept the floor or stirred the stew. The first time she did it, she froze the moment he entered, afraid she had broken some unspoken rule. But he didn't tell her to stop. He hung his coat, set down his rifle, and listened for a moment before continuing with his tasks. The next day, she hummed again, a little louder, less afraid. In return, he began carving again. At night, while she sat near the fire mending her dress or warming her hands, he carved pieces of wood into animals. A fox curled up to sleep, a bear standing tall, a bird with wings spread as if ready to fly. He carved them with a skill that came from years of living among the wild, a skill that came from a quiet heart. One morning, she woke to find a small wooden bird placed beside her pillow. She ran her thumb over its smooth wings, and for the first time in a long time, her lips almost formed a smile. She tucked the bird into her pocket like a precious secret. Winter held the mountains tightly. Snow piled high. Wolves howled at night. The world seemed far away. Sometimes, she caught the man watching her as she cooked or folded the blankets, not with hunger or ownership, but with a quiet confusion. As if he could not understand why he no longer wished for silence. But he never crossed the line. He kept his distance. He respected the space between them. One night she woke suddenly. The fire was low and the room freezing. She pulled the fur around her shoulders and then noticed him across the room, twisting in his sleep. His breaths were sharp, his jaw clenched. A sound escaped him that was part pain and part grief. She heard a single word fall from his lips like a broken plea. Anna. She didn't move, but she understood. That name belonged to someone he had loved, someone he had lost. She watched him fight the nightmare alone, and her heart ached for him. She knew what it was like to wake in darkness with memories that tore into the soul. Morning came with clear skies, but a heavy feeling. Later that day, a young boy from the settlement arrived. He came on snowshoes, face red from cold, breath shaking with urgency. The mountain man stepped outside to meet him, and she watched from the doorway. "They're coming," the boy said. "The trapper has been bragging down at the tavern. Said he sold a girl to the mountain beast. People heard. Her father heard. He's calling her a thief, saying she stole silver. He's put a bounty on her. Men are riding with the trapper. They plan to take her back. They won't care if she's alive when they do." The man's jaw tightened, not with fear, with something colder. His voice was steady. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. They left this morning." He handed the boy a cured pelt for the warning. "Go home. Forget you came here." The boy left quickly, swallowed by the trees. She stood in the doorway, her heart sinking into her stomach. The man turned to her. His blue eyes were no longer silent. They were sharp, clear, alive with something fierce. "They won't take you," he said. He didn't ask if the story was true. He didn't ask what she wanted. He had already decided. He began setting traps along the pass, the only path horses could travel. He moved with speed and skill, placing snares, tripwires, and hidden pits covered with snow. He worked with the focus of a man preparing for war, a man who had something to lose again. She watched, feeling both helpless and determined. Fear shook her, but something stronger grew inside her. She would not be dragged back, not alive, not ever. When he returned, he led her behind the cabin to a place she had never seen. Hidden by a frozen waterfall was a narrow opening in the rock. A perfect hiding spot. "When you hear the horses, you come here," he said. His voice was firm, steady. "You do not wait. You do not call my name. You stay until I come for you." She nodded, though her throat felt tight, but inside, she made her own silent promise. She would not hide while he faced danger alone. That night, they ate in silence. Not the peaceful silence they had shared before, but a heavy one. One filled with unspoken fear. She wanted to tell him she was thankful. She wanted to tell him she cared whether he lived or died. But neither spoke. When morning came, she slipped out on her own, taking a small pouch of berries and smoked fish. She spread the scent across a false trail in the woods, leading toward a rocky hollow where a bear had once denned. It was a desperate plan, but fear made her brave. Men were coming. Men who saw her as property. Men who believed pain was a way to keep a woman in line. But this mountain had changed her. She was not the same girl who had stumbled through the snow weeks ago. She had found warmth, safety, a piece of herself she thought had been beaten out of her, and she would fight for it. The sun was rising when she heard them. 3 riders. The trapper and 2 hired guns. Their voices carried through the trees, rough and eager. The mountain man was waiting, and this time he was not alone. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The trapper rode into the clearing first, his horse snorting clouds of steam into the cold morning air. Behind him were 2 hired gunmen, men with hard eyes and greedy hearts. They stopped a short distance from the cabin. The mountain man stood waiting in front of it, calm and still, as if he were part of the land itself. "She's here," the trapper called out with a cruel grin. "Her father wants her back, and we'll take the bounty too." "Step aside." "She's not going with you," the mountain man said. His voice was steady, strong enough to cut through the cold air. The trapper laughed. "You think you can stop us? You're just a wild beast hiding in the hills. We'll take her, same as they took your family. Watch them burn, didn't you?" The words hit him like a punch to the chest. His breath caught. The pain he had held buried for years surged up, raw and sharp. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with an old, deep hurt. At that moment, one of the hired gunmen shifted his horse forward. The horse stepped onto covered ground and suddenly dropped, legs sinking into a hidden pit. The animal reared back with a cry of fear. The gunman fell, hitting the snow hard. It was the signal. The mountain man moved fast, using the land he knew better than anyone. A tripwire sent the second gunman crashing into the snow. The mountain man rushed at him, knocking the gun from his hand with the butt of his rifle. But the trapper was already rushing at him with a knife, forcing him back toward the cabin wall. The blade pressed against the mountain man's throat. The trapper's voice was hateful. "You think you can save her? You couldn't save your own wife and child. You let them burn. Weak men don't get to keep anything." The mountain man's chest rose and fell as old memories tore through him. The fire, the screams, the helplessness. He had carried it alone for years. He had locked his heart away, believing he no longer deserved to feel anything. His voice broke as he spoke through the pain. "I haven't touched a woman since that night. Since I lost them. Since 1760. I swore I would never hold another." The cabin door opened. She stepped outside. She stood tall even though her knees shook. She looked at the trapper with steady eyes. Gone was the frightened girl who had arrived here. In her place stood a woman who had found her worth again. "You think he is weak?" she said, her voice shaking but loud. "This scar on my arm came from my father's anger over spilled tea. He sold me to you for gambling money, and now you call me a thief so you can drag me back to be beaten again. I am not your property." She pulled back her sleeve, showing the long scar across her skin. The men stared. The trapper faltered. The gunman, still holding his pistol, lowered it slightly. This was not the story they had been told. The mountain man saw his chance. With a fierce surge of strength, he twisted the trapper's wrist. The knife fell. He pushed the trapper hard against the cabin wall. The force knocked the breath from him. Snow fell from the roof with the impact. He didn't finish him with a killing blow. He simply broke him, broke his hold, broke his power. The last gunman holstered his weapon, grabbed his fallen partner, and mounted his horse. "We're done," he muttered. He pulled the wounded trapper up behind him and rode away. The mountains swallowed them, leaving only silence behind. A different silence this time, a clean one. Inside the cabin, she saw blood on the mountain man's arm. She quickly gathered herbs, crushed them, and mixed them with a little tallow. She knelt beside him to tend the wound. Her touch was gentle. His whole body tensed at first, unused to kindness. "You are free now," he said quietly. "You can go, start a new life in a new town." Her hands paused. She looked around the cabin. The fire that kept her warm. The furs that kept her safe. The little wooden bird he carved for her. Then she looked into his tired blue eyes. "I am home," she said softly. The words filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. Days passed. Snow softened. The world began to thaw. One evening he opened a small leather pouch he kept close to his heart. Inside was a single blue bead, worn smooth, the only thing he had left of his daughter. He held it in his palm for a long moment, then offered it to her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She understood. She turned her back to him and lifted her hair. His hands trembled as he gently braided the bead into the end of her hair. It wasn't a chain holding her down. It was a promise tying them together. Spring came. They planted a small garden. She sang while cooking, her voice soft but full of life. He smiled more, small smiles only for her. The wolves lay beside her on the porch, no longer wary of her. She belonged here now. They healed together, day by day, wound by wound. The mountains didn't feel so cold anymore. She had arrived at his door as payment for a debt. But in his silence she found peace. In his broken heart she found love. And he, who had once believed his heart had died in the fire, found warmth again because of her. Two souls forgotten by the world had found each other in the wilderness, not by force, not by fate, but by a quiet, gentle choice. And love grew there, strong and steady, like the mountain itself.